Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Berlinson. This is where we unpack the power of understanding to build bridges and to demolish boxes, because communication is essential in every aspect of life. It's what causes teamwork to flourish. It also makes relationships work better. And we want to grow our communication mastery together so that we can see the benefits in life at work and at home and in the community. And this week, I want to talk about helping couples. I've been helping a number of couples recently. It's a kind of spin-off of what I work with businesses. Very often somebody from that team will come to me and say, hey, could you help my spouse and me? Because there's areas where we miss each other, or there's areas where we get into arguments all the time. And so I've been helping several couples recently, and it's been very rewarding to see them start to understand where unpacking their unique profiles can really help them to turn differences into strengths. And they see each other in a new light when they can see each other through the science of communication and not just through the emotional challenges of trying to live together or get along together on a daily basis. And one aspect that I think is good to zero in on to start with is when a couple has big differences between them. Her first language is his lowest language, or his strongest language is somewhere down in the middle of her profile and she doesn't use it very often, that kind of thing. If you have that kind of dynamic between you, it's very easy to miss each other until you start to dig into what does the other need from me in order for our relationship to flourish. And hopefully you're in a relationship because you want the good of the other and not just of yourself. If that's not true, then it may be that you need to turn this podcast off and go get some counseling. But assuming you're in the relationship for the benefit of each other, then you can learn to turn your differences into strengths. You can learn to meet each other where you are. You can learn, what does my partner need from me in order to establish a deeper, stronger connection with me? And if I can answer the filter question that's primary, or maybe there's two or three if it's 2 or 3 languages high in the profile. But if I can narrow it down to when my spouse comes to me, she's asking this filter question, and I understand that that's the filter that our communication is going to go through initially, then I can learn to answer that question before we move on to whatever it is we need to discuss. And also, we each have unique needs from others. And unless that need is met, communication is always going to be a challenge or a difficulty. We're not going to be able to make those connections in the ways that we need to be effective as a couple and to get along more deeply. Sometimes I find that it helps with couples who are wired very differently. I help them to accept each other's character the way it's wired, or to recognize that there's a different driving passion in my spouse than there is in me. And if we can understand that each of us brings something enthusiastic or passionate to the table, then we can make room for those, and we actually benefit from both being effective, both being expressed, rather than one spouse feeling like the other isn't on the same page. So when the differences are big, then it can be a challenge, but once we work through those challenges, there's a great deal of strength to be gained there. The opposite scenario is sometimes a little more challenging to navigate. That's when two people are very similar, because then it's hard to recognize what do each of us bring to the table that we can draw on that will gain us ground in our communication and deepen our relationship further. But that's when I would use a tool that we call the success communication key. Suppose a couple, they both have the same first language and maybe their second and third are similar. Maybe they're reversed in their profiles, but they're all together there. That actually would be the case with my wife and I. We have the same top 3 languages, but in a completely different order. And this is where I learned to do this from, actually, was that somebody did this with us. And now I do it with couples whose profiles are similar. You take the success communication key and you each highlight which characteristics, which attributes of those top languages do I identify more with. So I highlight the ones that are particularly applicable to me. It won't be all of them because none of us have 100% of any of the languages. But when we compare our results, then we begin to see, okay, we have the same top languages, but actually the aspects of those languages that we bring to the table and bring into our relationship are different. And then we can see, okay, so for example, you're more enthusiastic, whereas I'm more bring everyone together. Or you want to encourage, while I'm much more about finding creative solutions. They work together and they're part of the same language profile, but we have different aspects of that language in our uniqueness. And that can be very helpful because when a husband and wife have different facets of the same language, they can sometimes wonder why they don't get along better, even though they speak the same language. When we dig into it in that kind of detail, that gives them insight into their relationship that they can build on. And when we can increase connection by improving communication and increasing the effectiveness of communication, we're reducing communication disconnects in a marriage or in a relationship, then that strong connection is fed by the enhanced communication. And that always benefits a relationship. This, of course, isn't just about romantic relationships. It may be in your relationship with a close friend or with a family member. I've seen where parents and children get along better by applying these same principles. And sometimes it's important to look at challenging patterns that have crept into a relationship. And again, particularly I see this most clearly with couples because that's usually the closest of our relationships, isn't it? But we need to find new ways to navigate conflict or to defuse any misunderstanding that's been going on. And I've got a whole range of tools that we use in those kinds of settings. I put them under the heading of communication forensics. What is it that's gone wrong and how do we resolve that by using some of these advanced tools that we've got? The first thing I would often do with a couple would be to upgrade their profiles from a personal profile to a professional profile, because the communication indicators, although they're not as predictive of behavior and interaction as the 7 communication languages are, they're still very valuable. Because if you have one half of a couple who has maybe a high acceptance level, they see themselves in a good light and they think well of themselves, but the other half, the other person in the relationship maybe has a lower acceptance level. That's not wrong or bad, it's just what it is, but that person would have more difficulty seeing themselves in a true light and need the input of others around them. If the first spouse who thinks they're fine doesn't see that their partner needs that encouragement or affirmation or validation for how they're wired and how they operate, then they may be neglecting to give them the very thing they need for that relationship to thrive. So communication indicators give that additional insight that can often highlight reasons why there's a pattern that needs changing. And another thing sometimes is that if both members of the couple have a high overall communication intensity, then they may need to just learn to be able to ease up on the gas a little when they're having a disagreement. Because otherwise, if they come at it at high speed or with high octane, if you like, then that just causes fireworks. And you can't really fight fire with gasoline. But if you learn to recognize, hey, this is a conflict moment, let's just ease up, that will help us. We won't create as much collateral damage and we'll be able to resolve things more easily. There's another tool that I use quite often. If a couple are missing one another because their profiles are very different, we'll do a crosstalks analysis where we start to figure out, so which languages in your profile have the greatest difficulty making a connection. When we look at crosstalks, it's to do with how the order of your languages has an impact on the communication styles that you use, but also on the effectiveness of your connection with the other person. And so we can put two people side by side, compare their profiles, and the crosstalk analysis can really help us to identify, here's a specific area that you could work on together that will help to resolve some of those conflicts or help to reduce the miscommunications. And when you do that, you can turn what otherwise would be cross talks where we miss each other, you can turn them into cross ties. I guess the best analogy for that would be in the roof of your home. Hopefully the beams up there are all at different angles and cross over each other, because that's what gives strength to your roof structure. It holds the roof up. And so if we can do that with our communication styles, we can often end up with greater strength in our relationship as a result. And there's one other tool, finally, a tool that I call expressing my languages. I use this often if there's a lot of conflict between two people, particularly in a relational setting with a couple. They can communicate and express their own preferences in communication, their own profile, the way they bring themselves to the table in a way that doesn't create conflict. It's kind of it's processed with the coach in the conversation, but they can express their own communication style to each other in a way that promotes a deeper understanding. And many of the couples who've used that tool have said that really helped them to lower the conflict level and increase the understanding level, so that they've got a stronger foundation to build from moving forward. And what I'm starting to do with my Communication IQ for Couples package is to then add on at the end of that initial package of conversations a graduated check-in program, if you like. So a little bit like if you go to the chiropractor. After your first few adjustments, you need to go weekly just to make sure you're maintaining that adjustment. And we can have a weekly check-in to make sure that what you've been learning about each other is being applied in a healthy way. But then as it begins to bear fruit, you back off to every 2 weeks and just check in every 2 weeks. And then you go to kind of maintenance level, where a monthly check-in is sufficient to keep things healthy and to keep things growing. And so if you know someone who that would be helpful for, let's say that it might be a friend of yours, it might not be your relationship, but if you know someone that would be beneficial for them to be able to do some communication forensics on a relationship that maybe is more explosive than they'd like it to be, or more caustic than they want, then send them to my website and look at Communication IQ for Couples, because it could really make a big difference to a relationship. And we need your relationship to flourish so that you both can be your place in the picture of our community, or your workplace, or wherever it is, your neighborhood even. We want you to be able to get along strongly, because then you get the best return on investment for all that you've put into that relationship. So reach out to me. I'd love to help you if this would be applicable to you. That's it for this week. Stick around and we'll see you again next week with another topic.